Welcome everyone. This is another episode of Live, Learn, Life with me, Dylan Swanepoel, and I'm joined today with a man called Andrew Dickinson, who is currently working in custodian services at a company that's based in Kent as a detention officer, working with people that are looking to seek asylum in the UK, and is has a fascinating story of where he's been. He's come from a bit of a architecture, drama, actor um, custodian background, and it's just fascinating individual to sort of speak with and learn from a little bit. So Andrew, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. And following our conversation last week, I'm quite excited by it. So if you would just like to tell people a bit about yourself, where you've been, what's happening in life, and sort of where you are now.
Right. Okay, I will. Yes, I'm. My name's Andrew Dickinson. I'm an ex-prison governor. Currently, I am sort of partially retired and just working part-time for an American company called MTC. MTC are providing a lot of staff at an asylum seeker centre in Kent. So I don't actually work hands-on there, but I act as a kind of custodial advisor to MTC. I've said before to many people, nobody actually starts out life saying when they're at school, when I grow up, I want to be a prison governor, and nor did I either. In fact, when I left school, I still didn't know really what I wanted to do. But yeah, a bit about me, about how I got to be where I am and where I've been, I suppose. I was born in South Wales and brought up in Scotland, just outside Glasgow, in a place called Greenock. And as Dylan and I have talked in the past, in those days, and it's probably still a bit like that, Greenock, being the west coast of Scotland, was a bit like Northern Ireland in the sense that Protestants and Catholics were a bit separated, and the two cultures didn't really combine in any meaningful way. So I went to a Protestant school, and I knew people that went to a Catholic school, and my school had no Catholics in it, and the Catholic school had no Protestants in it. So it was a bit of a strange cultural upbringing in those senses. However, when I finished school, I went to Newcastle University and studied architecture, and then I got a job in London working for a small firm of architects, and I wasn't fully qualified; I was just part qualified at that point. I became interested in playing in a band, which I started to do. I became interested in performing in general, really, and that's what got me interested in drama. Now, I suppose the odd thing is that at that point I was very, very shy. When I was growing up, I was painfully shy. When I was at university, I was painfully shy. In fact, I think I spent most of my entire first year at university not saying a word to anybody. Which is a bit of a feat considering it was Newcastle. I was at university, but one place I did sort of lose my inhibitions was being on stage, which apparently is quite common with actors and performers in that they're quite often very shy people. But when I was working as an architect in London, I then, towards the end of my time there, I went to drama school part-time while I was still working. And I just had found my home, it felt. And any notion of shyness or dignity, indeed, was hammered out of me by the work we had to do in drama school. And if I could recommend anything to anybody in the world, it would be go to drama school. It's the best thing for anybody, because in terms of bringing you out of yourself, about communication skills, about all those things, I think is absolutely wonderful. And the bonds you make with your fellow actors or fellow drama school attendees is amazing. So I went to drama school, and my then wife at the time decided that she wanted to move out of London, where we were living, and move to Liverpool. So I thought, well, I can be an actor just as well in Liverpool as I can be in London. So up we went to just outside Liverpool. We then, of course, got divorced. But I was started working for a professional small-scale touring theatre company. We toured the country with a Harold Pinter play, and then toured later on with a Carol Churchill play. Loved it, absolutely loved it. Trouble is, if you want to make any money, any meaningful money, unless you are one of the very few who become famous, acting is not the profession you want to be in. So it was a bit hand to mouth, and I was unemployed quite a few times, and so on and so on. During one period of being unemployed, I worked backstage at a theatre in Southport, just north of Liverpool, and that's where I met my current wife. Um, and I was doing a bit of acting, I was doing a bit of set design, I was doing a bit of directing, a bit of backstage work. I then got taken on permanently. I then ended up being part of the management team in the theatre. And that's when it started to get a bit dull and boring, would you believe? Because I've always worried about what I do. I still worry about what I do. And to some extent, the work I was doing wasn't worth worrying about. I mean, if the show didn't go on, nobody was going to die. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there were a lot of petty kind of concerns, both from the public and from the actors sometimes, that would drive you mad. So I was looking for something that was worth worrying about, to be cliched about it. And it does sound very cliched, but it is absolutely true. And then I saw an advert in the Sunday Times for direct entrant trainee prison governors. So I thought, ooh, that looks interesting. That looks worth worrying about, because you're dealing with people. So I applied, and after about 6 months of various assessments, I got in. And what we had to do, because we were trainee governors, we had to do the prison officer training. And then we had to work as a prison officer on the landings for a few months. And I was posted to Strangeways Prison in Manchester, which I absolutely adored. I loved it because it was working with people, really busy every day. Culturally, it was really interesting because, excuse me, I remember talking to a prisoner who was a bit concerned about a few things, and I heard all the rest of the staff, the other prison officers on the landing, meowing like cats. And I thought, wonder why they're doing that. And the prisoner said to me, "They're meowing at you because you're being nice to me." And that's what they do when prison officers were nice to prisoners. They used to meow because they thought that meant that you were soft and like a cat. So I thought, ooh, yeah, difficult culture there. But, I loved my time there, though. And then I went to Liverpool prison for governor training. Was there for 4 years. Big prison. We were, at the time, the largest prison in Western Europe, I think, in terms of numbers of prisoners. And I worked my way up through various prisons. I was third in charge at Durham Jail. I was third in charge back again at Strangeways. I was deputy governor at Risley Prison. And I got my first number one governor's post, I think it was 2011, at a big cat sea jail in Yorkshire called Wealdstone. I was there for 4 years. I then took some time out, did a couple of projects for Prison Service Headquarters, during which time I was also put into Highdown Prison, Surrey, to be governor for a short time, and then ended up being governor of Wetherby Young Offenders Institution, looking after 250 under 18-year-olds, so 15 to 18-year-olds, with a big staff contingent as well. Very difficult job looking after children because you're under so much scrutiny from everybody. And it's difficult to do the right thing, and you're working with some very difficult, sometimes very violent young people. But I loved it. And after 3 years there, I stepped down and partially retired and ended up then working for MTC. So here I am. I've loved every minute of it. Then.
Been here, there, and everywhere. I mean, all around the UK, and so like I think a fortunate sort of life in the way that you've been able to have access to so many different cultural experiences. I think back to sort of what we spoke briefly about was growing up like just outside Glasgow. That what was it like growing up during that time when it was Protestants with Catholics, and what was sort of the interactions like with children?
It was difficult at times. I remember, when the school I went to had a maroon uniform, and all the Protestant schools either had a maroon or blue uniform, and all the Catholic schools had a green uniform, which meant, of course, you could tell each other apart at the town centre, about 100 yards away, which wasn't always good, as you can imagine. the other thing is, I mean, most people are aware of the rivalry between Rangers and Celtic, the two big football clubs in Glasgow. And Rangers are the Protestant club, and Celtic, because they wear green, are the Catholic club. And an example of how that would work at the time, I remember my local team, which is called Green at Morton, were playing at home, and Celtic were the visiting team. And the visiting supporters outnumbered the home supporters, would you believe? And the visiting supporters just, in order just to wind up the home supporters, just cut to the chase. And they didn't chant Celtic, they just chanted IRA. And that's what it was like. But I remember when I was part of the under-14s school athletics team, and we went to a Catholic school sports day, and we had to have a police escort home because there were grown men waiting for us outside the changing rooms. The teacher that was with us then had to call the police to get us out of there safely. So just shows you something of what the culture was like at the time. Having said that, I enjoyed growing up there. I mean, my first ever job was a summer job when I was 16 in one of the shipyards on the Clyde. And my charge hand, so my boss, I was just a labourer. My boss, charge hand, sprayed his work boots green so everybody could tell he was a Catholic. And that's what it's like. So there was a bit of humour with it as well, you know. Yeah, it was when you sometimes, when I've explained that to people in England, they don't realise that that's what it was like. And the west coast of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. And it used to be like that years and years and years ago, I think, a bit in some of the other west coast ports. So Liverpool was a bit like that with Everton and Liverpool and so on. But yeah, it was interesting.
Why do you think that is, that sort of the English people weren't quite aware of what it was like during
Well, I think because most English people, unless they live in either Liverpool or one of the cities nearby, wouldn't have come across that. I mean, I don't think you come across that divide so much in most places in England. It really just is west of Scotland, a couple of northwestern English ports, as well as Northern Ireland. And there's always been that there. I mean, thankfully, there's been relative peace for quite a long time now. But of course, I grew up I was 16 in 1972, and the early 70s, well, the 70s as a whole was really the height of the Troubles, to be honest, as they still call them in Northern Ireland. And I remember going to Dublin when I was 19, so 1975 that would have been. And the first question anybody in Southern Ireland always asked me was, are you a Protestant? And I said, yes, I am. And then they were all very nice. They all said, some of my best friends are Protestants, they always say. But, you know, it was because I then spoke at the time, because I was brought up in just outside Glasgow, I spoke with quite a strong Glaswegian accent.
Okay.
And to Southern Irish people, that could have been a Belfast accent, which is why they always said, are you a Protestant? So, but, you know, it was an interesting time. And I think the 70s were interesting times all over, to be honest.
It seems like learning a bit about history and sort of what was going on in those times, and speaking to my parents.
I don't like to think of it as history because I was there. I always think of history as being before I was around. You know,
that is true. Well, for me, it was before I was around, so it has to be history. In terms of sort of culture, when you move away from the time in Scotland, experiencing that, but you're experiencing culture throughout England. So you've been all over. You were in Newcastle, in London, Liverpool, Manchester, all over the sort of shop. So what are some of your best cultural experiences or things that you've learned from different cultures?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Well, I think what I learned when I first went to university in Newcastle was that Geordies are lovely people. They're amazing people. I think Newcastle was the first place I'd ever been where you can walk into any pub in the city centre and people will talk to you because they are so friendly. I mean, partly the reason they'll talk to you is they're nosy. You know, they want to know who you are and what you're doing there. But they're ever so friendly. And there really is that cliche difference between Londoners, for example, or going to London going to a pub in London and going to a pub in Newcastle or a pub in Liverpool or a pub in Manchester. Northern people tend to be, which is something I've learned over the years, tend to be more open, I think, and less kind of suspicious. People in London can come across as being quite closed, which is a shame. Also, what I've realized over the past few years is that a lot of what goes on in this country is very London-centric. So it's almost like most of what happens in the country happens in London, and the rest of the country doesn't really matter. And I know people, for example, who live in Cornwall and Devon, and they feel exactly the same. They feel a bit ignored sometimes. And I think that's what people in the north tend to feel sometimes, is that Westminster and the London government, if you will, tends to ignore the north of the country and places like the West Country, like Cornwall. So that's one thing I've learned. And, it's extraordinary in such a small country how, if you travel, for example, from Manchester to Liverpool, it's not very far as the crow flies at all, but you can go through 3 or 4 different accents and about 3 or 4 ways of describing a bread cake, something, a roll or a balm cake or a bread cake or an oven bottom cake. Tea cake. There's all kinds of things. And, I don't think there's any other country in the world where that happens in the space of 20 miles. You have 4 different accents, but it does happen in this country. So, but, I think one thing I've realized by working in prisons is that what's important are people. People are important. And that, because we're a small country with a relatively high population, that's what we get all the time is people, don't we?
Yeah, and every square foot is a load of us.
Yes, there are. Yeah,
it is quite funny, sort of like seeing it from an Oxford perspective, and sort of going to different areas of Oxford itself, and sort of saying like how the accent changes or the lingo changes, and how people change dramatically, and sort of see like on an international scale as well, coming with that South African background of how different that cultures are, and how, again, I think the importance of interacting with people and understanding culture, how that plays a much bigger role than people get to realize, and sort of understanding the importance of people. And so one of my favorite stories is, I remember I was on a cricket tour, and this was in 2013. So 2013, and so Nelson Mandela just died in South Africa, and all big, like the debacle, and sort of country in mourning. And I remember being on a tour, and I was oddly, I was one of the minority in the team. So I was generally in a team with people that were of color, that were practicing Islam, and they were Muslims. And I remember us going down into the team room, and there were about 3 or 4 white kids, and we all sat down for the first time and observed prayer. And I remember like feeling so much more connected to individuals there, because I got to understand and sort of see why they were doing it, and ask questions, and be exposed to these cultural, well, like what would be for me a cultural phenomenon, but for them it's normal practice. And sort of getting that interest in people from there has been sort of my like big takeaway with life, is how important those people are, to understand why they're doing it, not necessarily just what they're doing, but the purpose behind it, and gain their trust from it, and so being open to saying, I want to learn about you, I want to know about you, and seeing that positive impact that has on people. And I'm sure, like you said, like last week, there's a few stories like that going around in prisons, and that it's all about people trying to get to know people. So do you have any similar story to that, and so like what you've learned from, or learn about different cultures or different people from working as a prison governor?
Well, I think one thing that stayed with me is that I remembered when I left Manchester prison and was about to start training to be a prison governor, the chair of the local branch of the Prison Officers Association, the union, the basic grade prison officers union, who were very powerful, he called me into his office and said, I'll give you a bit of advice if you're going to be a governor. He said, the prisoners will never cause you any problems. It's the staff. And that was, he said, and that was coming from the local branch chair of the union. And he's absolutely right, he's absolutely right. And the other thing he said was, he said 2 more bits of advice. He said, every day, somebody's going to get one over on you. And if you can't handle that, you're in the wrong job. that's a piece of advice that stayed with me forever, because I've met so many people that cannot stand the idea of somebody getting one over on them. They just can't handle it at all. And in this job, in the job of a prison governor, you've got to be able to handle that, because sometimes it's a member of staff, sometimes it's a prisoner, but somebody will always get one over on you, And if you, like I say, if you can't handle that, you're in the wrong job, because you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with people, some of whom are at the roughest part of their lives they've ever been in, because they're going to jail or they've just been sent to jail. But the other big lesson I did learn is that there are very few really bad people in jail. Most of the people in jail are fairly good people who've just done bad things. You get one or two who are genuine, like really, really awful people. I met Harold Shipman once, the doctor who killed hundreds of people, and he was horrible. As you would expect. But, I've met most prisoners I've met have not been horrible people. They've just been people who have done bad things and been in bad circumstances and made bad decisions. And that's really one of the lessons I've learned about, certainly with culture. And the other thing about culture is that it's not something you can easily quantify. So every prison's got its own culture, as has every town. And I suppose an easy way of defining culture is the way things are done around here. That is the culture, I suppose. That's an easy way of doing it. But every prison feels different, and you get good cultures and you get bad cultures. And the fascinating thing is you can feel it when you walk into a jail, as you can feel it, I guess, when you walk into a university, when you walk into a school, any big organization, you can feel the culture.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm really interested in. I'm not quite sure how it works, but I think it's a whole combination of everything, including how the place smells, how it looks, the unseen little signals you get. I remember going to one prison, for example, which shall remain nameless, but it's not a very good jail. But the first thing you see as somebody professional like me visiting the jail, the first thing you see when you walk through the gate is a great big notice board with all the trades union stuff on it. And I think that's a bad sign if that's the first thing you see as a visitor. That's an indication of the culture to me, that is potentially not a particularly caring culture. But I think culture, the way you feel culture, is every sense you've got, really. So it's things you see, but don't really notice that you're seeing. It's things you hear. It's the way it sounds. It's the way it smells. It's everything. And the odd thing about that is that the minute you walk through the front door, you can feel that, which is fascinating. And that's, people, I think, obviously, are the main contributors to that, aren't they? So again, it's all about people. It's not complicated. It's just people, isn't it?
And I was saying that last week. You're saying we're looking at the small things and how the finer details, the smaller details. Even though we're not consciously paying attention to it, but as soon as we walk into a room, you can pick up a scent. You can see something in the corner of your eye. Whether that's, for example, you walking around a prison or me walking around a school. I remember when I changed schools, when I walked into the school that I'm currently at and walked through the gate, and straight away could feel a completely sort of sense of calm and relax.
Yes. Yeah.
And all of a sudden going, okay, cool. This is the place that I need to be right now. And I was like, okay, cool. Straight away, because I had another offer at another school, and I was like, it felt different. And the one I've chosen, thankfully, I did, because it's given me the chance to sort of pay attention. Give me examples of pay attention to the small details and see what the finer things are in life, and that's created the culture that I've been around. And I think a big thing for me coming with a sport background and how important it is to have culture, or a team culture, and build a place. And so we're trying to see a change in the club that I'm playing for in Oxford Cricket Club, how when now 5 years after I joined the club, I'm the sole individual that was playing 5 years ago for our club in our first team, and now it's a completely different bunch and different group, and we're changing culture, and we're sort of creating an environment that you really want to be a part of, and people want to play for one another, and people like being around each other, and it's sort of yeah, that the smile and the scent, and so like even like seeing like how other players interact with us, and how even like match officials such as like umpires, they walk into us, and you could tell straight away in the past that they didn't like us, and all of a sudden we were sort of sitting around with a couple of umpires and actually having a nice chat with people, and again speaking to the person, not to the job title, and like understanding what they like as people. It's allowed us to have more open communication and more develop like the small details in sport, but also for us to sort of have a bit more of a laugh and sort of gain a great understanding of different cultures. And because we have a lot of umpires that aren't from the UK, and that's been nice to sort of connect with people that way. I don't know what do you think about small details, but I know you said it is quite important to focus on it, but why would you say it is for you?
Well, I think because people notice the small details sometimes. I used to mentor new prison governors, and one thing I'd always say to them is that as a governor, because you are the leader, it's like you are the captain of the ship when you're walking around the jail. People are watching you, staff are watching you all the time, just because you're the number one governor, and they're listening to you as well. So you can make some snidey off the cuff remark, but people will hear that and they'll remember it. And it may not have been a nice remark to their ears, so you've got to be very, very careful how you are as a person and how you talk, to whom you talk, and how you relate to people, because you are the boss, you are the leader. And I think my leadership's another thing I'm quite interested in, because, again, it's a bit difficult to define, but my favorite definition of leadership is that leadership is the ability to inspire willing support. And what that means is that people want to work for you. So even when you're not there, because they know you're in charge, you're the boss, they will still want to do a job for you. Now, the easiest thing in the world as a governor, because people have to do it, is to bully people into doing things, like saying, you will do that because I say so, and they'll do it. But of course, when your back's turned and when you're not there, they'll stop doing it. Of course they will. If they don't want to do it, they won't do it. So you can get a short-term fix by behaving like that, but you will never get a long-term change in culture. The long-term change in culture is by getting yourself in a position where people want to work for you and they want to do what they need to do for you. That's the right culture to get, I think. It's not easy to get, and it does take time, but it's the right one to get in the end, I think. Again, that's to get to there, that you have to concentrate on both the tiny things, the small details, as well as the big things. And sometimes you have to act as a disruptor almost sometimes. So if things have been the same way for a long time and they're obviously not working, but people are unwilling to change, sometimes you have to disrupt that to change it. And you have to remind people why they're there sometimes, I've been in prisons where the staff are all really miserable, and the first thing they will tell you is how hard their job is and how awful it is. And you have to remind them, actually, that it is one of the best jobs in the world, and they should enjoy it, because if they enjoy their jobs, they'll do a better job. Of course they will. And even difficult jobs like being prison staff can be really enjoyable. And again, the other thing that happens is that the prison service is as guilty as this as any big organization. They'll try and convince you that what you do is really complicated. It's not. It's very simple. It's just dealing with people. That's all it is. It's dealing with people. That's not the same thing as saying it's easy, though, because it's not easy. Yeah. But it isn't complicated. It's very simple. And I think people get, I suppose, drawn into this idea that is really complicated and very difficult, really complicated, and because a lot of people fall back on process, and they put a process into place, and then they lose sight of what the process is supposed to achieve. What is the outcome what is the outcome of the work we're doing that we need? Well, the outcome is you look after prisoners with, in prisons, you look after prisoners with dignity and respect, and you help them change their lives around so they don't reoffend. That's what the outcome is. But there are millions of very complicated processes involved in that. And sometimes because of the process, you lose sight of what you're supposed to be doing. And that's some of the cut through, I think, that a good culture needs. And you will find that in education yourself, Dylan, I suspect.
Yeah, yeah. So in that was so again thinking about my past school. So I'm nearly done 5 years, and so straight out of high school and straight into work, and
Mm,
straight away sort of seeing how kids will work for you, and sort of trying to get them to start understand the process
yeah.
of like why we're doing things. It's not, especially at a young age in a prep school, for them, it's trying to get them to shift away from that result focus. It's to go, okay, what process are we trying to achieve here? I can tell you what the end goal is, and I'll keep reminding you of the end goal, but I need you to remind me of what the process is. And then once they figure out what the process, then for me straight away results started to happen.
Mm,
And this was sort of evident last year. A bit of a toot of my own horn was like the school I'm at. It's not a very big school, not a very sporting school, and I was working with a bunch of kids last year in hockey, and we sort of went through a phase where I rather than the first thing that the staff said to me was that these kids haven't got on with each other since reception, and they're in year six. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That's not great news to hear. So the first thing I did was, fortunate enough, I had 3 sessions with them a week, and just we sat down for the first like month and a half, and we just spoke freely and openly to each other and tried to get like, an understanding of why everyone was doing certain things, why the processes were happening, and what the results were of that. And after that, it seemed like they came a little bit tighter as a group. And unfortunately, we had a couple of players who pulled up clutch in moments, but we created a culture where it was all about one another, and it was
mm,
never about the end goal. And all of a sudden, we came back and went to this hockey tournament where we came back from it, and we came back late. And the staff were messaging me, "Where are you? Like, what's happening? Like, what's going on?" I just replied, we're going to come back late. We're going to go win the tournament." Came back, and I'm like, how have you won? Like, how's this happened? Because their group didn't have that culture. And I think what you're saying was where you come in as a disruptor, and you sort of cause a bit of shock to the system,
mm,
and go, well, this is what I was missing. We're going to implement this idea. We're going to see what's happened. And to see that happen quite quickly for
mm.
hockey, and for them to go and qualify for like a national tournament, win a county cup, and actually be like one of the more successful teams that the school's ever had within the space of me being there for 2 months. It was
Mm,
quite a remarkable thing to see and go, right. So even with working with prisons and creating a culture there, creating a bit of a shock, being a disruptor to change the culture, or doing that in education is very much the same level. It's just, again, I think we'll say like the overall message of how do we manage people and how
mm.
to interact with
Yeah.
people, and
And
keeping.
sometimes, I know in prisons, sometimes you have to do it with a lot of humor as well, because, you've got to laugh, because otherwise you cry. Because, when you manage a prison, um, you govern a prison by the consent of the prisoners. If the prisoners, we don't have guns or any of that stuff, in this country, in prisons.
Yeah,
Um, if all the prisoners suddenly decided they didn't want us to run the jail, they could do it. Even if they were locked in their cells, they could do it. So we run it by consent, by dealing with them properly, by dealing with them decently. But yeah, there's a lot of humour in prisons. There has to be. There has to be, because you go mad otherwise. I mean, it is a strange thing to do, to make your living by locking people up. It's an odd thing to do, isn't it?
yeah,
And like I said at the beginning, nobody when they're at school says, when I grow up, I want to be a prison governor. Nobody says that. I'm sure they don't. They just fall into it somehow.
yeah.
But there are some funny moments in prisons. I remember an angry prisoner shouting at me at Liverpool, and he was saying, he said, "It's really crap, this prison." He said, "It's rubbish, this prison." He said, "I've been in 7 prisons before this one, and each one of those prisons has rehabilitated me, and this one hasn't." So you get funny moments like that. You really do. I remember another prisoner shouting at me, saying he wanted to see principal officer. I don't remember what his name was, and I said to him, I was thinking, I don't remember, that doesn't ring a bell, that name. And then I realised it was a character in a television series called Bad Girl. Oh, P.O. Fenner. Yeah, and this prisoner was asking to see P.O. Fenner, and I said to him, "It doesn't exist. He doesn't exist. He's on telly." So yeah, you do get funny moments. You do get funny moments. But I suppose like a bunch of teachers or like a bunch of policemen or a bunch of people, in the army, there is a bit of a camaraderie because of, I suppose, the shared adversity of people who work in jails, and that again is nice when it's in the right cultural sort of context. It's really nice that. So I miss working in the prison, but I know that they're in difficult circumstances at the moment because the system is full and so on and so on. I'm really glad I've done it. I wouldn't change anything. I really wouldn't.
And with that working in prisons and how we're saying that, realizing that life's actually simplistic, how have you gone about simplifying life?
By getting the staff, I suppose, to talk to prisoners more. I mean, I remember a staff once that said to me, when you unlock a prisoner in the morning, what do you say to them? I said, well, good morning. Went, oh, right, okay. And again, that's the business about, they were assuming there was going to be something complex to do when you opened a cell door. Yeah. And there wasn't. You just say, good morning. You know what I mean? So getting the staff to engage with prisoners is the first step, really. And sometimes you have to show them how to do it yourself by going on a landing, opening a cell door, going inside a cell, sitting on a prisoner's bed and having a chat with them. And the staff are watching outside like this, and to get them the idea, they just go and talk to them. Okay, they're behaving oddly today. Why? Go and talk to them. Find out what's going on. They could have had a bad conversation with their girlfriend or their mother or their wife or whatever. Find out what's going on in their heads. And that's the start of it. Really is getting them to actually talk to prisoners. And again, that comes back to my point before about it's about people, isn't it? It's about people.
So, how important would you say that it is to have relationships, like positive relationships? Where do you rank that sort of skills that are needed in life, or some things that are needed?
I think it's probably up there as being the top one, to be honest. I really do. And I suppose the sad thing is that you get taught that by example and by default, I suppose, rather than actually being taught it, don't you? I mean, I don't recall ever at school somebody saying, right, it's time for a relationship class now to teach you how to, to discuss how to engage with other people. And perhaps there should be. I don't know. Perhaps there should be. Because there are a few people around now that I've met who don't appear to be that good at engaging with other people, other than maybe their close friends, for example. But, somebody from outside their very close circle, ask them to engage with that person, and they're not very good at it sometimes. And again, that brings me back, I suppose, to drama school, doesn't it? About communication skills. I think that's the most important thing. You need to make yourself understood to start with, and that's probably something I was guilty of when I was at school, because I had a strong Glaswegian accent, and maybe people can understand me. Probably true, I had it beaten out to me in a way at drama school. But the good thing about that is, it's great having an accent, but you need to make yourself understood. And I love accents. I love your accent.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. It's quite funny you mentioned that. So for me, when I first came to the UK, and my first few months or so, I spoke normally as I would back home, and I would rattle through words, sentences, and still use phrases that I would use back home. And then I realized, like, half the time no one understood what I was saying. And I went, oh, okay. And I went, I'm going to have to slow down how I speak to everyone. And from there, I went back home, and straight away back home, and they're like, you've changed. Like, why are you speaking weirdly? And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I had to change my mind again when I was back home for 3 weeks. And I went straight back into speaking how I would back home. And funny enough, I had a phone call today with another South African, and it was just weird, like, hearing his accent, and I was being like, I've missed hearing this. This feels very calming and relaxing, and hearing these accents and being able for him to communicate with me and for me to understand straight away, like, knew his accent, knew what he was from, knew what he was about. But then in the UK, sort of having to adapt that accent, and for me to,
I've been there. I remember when I first went home after going to university, and my accent started to change, I suppose, because I'm trying to make myself understood. Exactly the same as you. And I went back home to just outside Glasgow. And I went to the local rugby club, and there was some sort of event on in the evening. And I was standing at the bar, and this drunk came over to me and said, in a broad Glaswegian accent, and he said to me, "Are you posh or are you just English?" And I thought, so there's no right answer to that one. So I just said, "I'm just posh." He said, "All right then." And off he went, off he staggered, because they thought I was beginning to sound English, which of course wasn't, to him anyway, wasn't well thought of. Yeah. So yeah, no, I love accents. I love accents, but
It's funny.
yeah.
I came across a video from someone called, I don't know if you've ever heard of someone called Trevor Noah, who's a South African
Oh
comedian.
yeah.
And hosted the Late Late Show in America. And it was quite funny coming across one of his old videos of how he was going about how white South Africans speak to black South Africans, and trying to understand why South Africans were changing the way they spoke when they were speaking to a black South African. And it's a really funny clip, because he was going to a gig, and sort of at the gate, and he was trying to say to this one of the black security guards that his name's Trevor, and because of the accents, the gentleman didn't quite understand. It kept going Reva or like Trevor, and it's like, and he's going, "No, Trevor." He says he's one of his mates in the car, so like leans across to me and went, "It's Trevor," and just like changed his accent completely. And the guy's like, "Oh, Trevor, why didn't you say it so?" It's like, again, like in a country where like he's really well known, but probably not at that point, and like actually having to be able to communicate and change accents so people can understand. And I remember doing that as well when, again, back when I was 13, and that same tour where I said something in a completely different accent to what mine was, and it was sort of more towards like a person of colors, or in South Africa how people are called colored, and in that community. And I said something there, and straight away the coach turned around to me and started laughing at me, and it was like, "One of us now, you one of us now." And sort of seeing like that, and again, I would say like the importance of sort of communication, but also to have that skill where you can change accents, like same message, use the same words, but having the change of accent where people can actually understand you, whether it's slowing your voice down or changing the speed or pace, when so people can actually communicate with you, like how cool that is and how fascinating it is, but also how, like, again, simplistic it is to allow people to communicate.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll go again with communication. So how I'm thinking about back to your drama school, and you sort of saying was like dignity got stripped from you. How important that was in sort of your life with and allowing you to become more open to communication. How important was that phase in drama school?
For me, it's very important because we did a lot of having to stand up in front of the rest of the class. There's about 30 of us, I think, in total, and perform something. Drop of a hat, you'd be asked to do it. So you had very little preparation sometimes to do it. So you had to be ready to get up there and do sometimes very strange things. And, the end of the first term, we all had to stand up in front of the rest of the year and sing a song unaccompanied. We had to give a soliloquy, a Shakespeare soliloquy or something like that. And we also had to do our animal, which most people did a dog because they know what dogs are like. So I did a dog as well. We had to sort of crawl around the stage barking like a dog. Now, if you had any element of shyness or reticence or any notion of dignity and behaving in a dignified way, that went straight out the window after doing that. But that was one reason you end up having this kind of shared identity with the rest of the class, because everybody had to do it. So people got used to that. And that's what performing is about, I suppose. And that's why a lot of actors, or a lot of quite shy people, become actors, because they can get away with not being themselves. They're being somebody else. So their shyness comes out in being somebody else. And I think that's a really interesting thing. the trouble with being shy, and I've come across shy people since then, and I must have come across like this, is you can come across as being a bit aloof, a bit sort of separate. People sometimes think you're a bit arrogant, that sort of thing, because you're shy, because you're not joining in with everybody else. So it is important to overcome it, I think. It really is. I remember in prisons, we used to do quite a lot of workshops around stuff like that, because making yourself understood is the first step really into gaining employment, isn't it? You know, so when you leave jail, you want to get work so you don't end up doing something to get you back to jail. I remember when I was at Liverpool, we did a tie-in with the Liverpool Comedy Festival. So we had a week where some comedians came in, did some workshops with a group of prisoners in conjunction with the education department. And then at the end of that week, they did a performance to prisoners and to staff, telling jokes and all that, doing little sketches and things like that. And it was brilliant because you saw some men who had spent, 10, 15 years being in and out of jail, had never come across anything like this before, but they were willing to give it a go, and they got up there and they did it. It was brilliant. Unfortunately, the Daily Mail got hold of that, and I think it was a half a whole page in the Daily Mail devoted to wasting taxpayers' money by teaching prisoners to tell jokes. And I had ITV turned up at the gate and asked me to do an interview, and I said no. No way I'm doing an interview. And I thought I'm going to lose my job here because, but I just said to them, look, it's not wasting public money because it's teaching prisoners communication skills, valuable communication skills. And it made a great story for the Daily Mail, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
But, that's what you're up against, really, when you do stuff like that in prison. You're up against, because the general public on the whole don't really care about prisons until they know somebody who's been sent to jail, like their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife, whatever. And then they become instant prison reformers, don't they? Instant. But up to that point, they don't really care. They think, well, they're keeping nasty, evil people off the street, so whatever. But then so when they hear a story about something like that going on, they get all outraged. Why are you feeding them? Things like that. And that's the difficult part of the job, I guess.
I think that goes back to straight away what you were saying was people trying to actually understand, like they just think of prison as, and that the process of prison is you go to prison, you spend time in prison, you come out reformed. But in order to be reformed, you actually need to, so in a way, upskill yourself as you would in normal life. It's almost, I think like a way that could be phrased it as like, it's probably not ideal to know, but people that are in prison are still at work. They are at work in prison. Yes, they're not being paid or anything, but they're still like we are. They're basically attending a course for like their sentence is a course where they have to learn how to become supposedly a better, or in society's eyes, a better human. But they're upskilling themselves so when they go back into society that they have skills where they can go and find a better job, can go live a better life, that they're actually needing this time to grow as individuals instead of they're in there because they're a bad person and they've done bad things. That's not what the process is. That's not what the purpose of prison is. That's what I'm getting from our conversation, that there's so much more to what meets the eye, and people sort of, with anything, need to read into it a bit more. Tabloids say, everyone loves a tabloid. I know. Love a bit of gossip.
Well, luckily they didn't get hold of. One time we did a dance workshop with prisoners. We couldn't call it dance because they wouldn't have done it if we called it dance. So we called it physical theatre, but it was dance basically. We had a dance company and do some workshops with them for a whole week, and they put on a performance at the end. And these were men, sort of, 40-year-old men, had never done anything like this in their lives before. And it was amazing to watch. And what they got out of that, the feeling they got out of that was immense. But luckily, Daily Mail didn't get hold of that one.
They would have been jumping on that straight away, wouldn't they?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But, that's, like I said before, and like I always say to people, it's just people, isn't it? It's just people. And people say to me, well, architecture and acting and being prison governor. That's quite different, isn't it? And I will say, no, it's not. Architecture is about building for people, designing for people. Theatre is about being other people and affecting the audience. So it is about people, and being a prison, prison governor is about managing people. They're all about people. So there you are. That was me. But I've loved it. I'm still smiling. Anyway.
And then sort of now looking at sort of asylum seekers, I know in the UK, I don't know too much about, but it seems like a bit of a touchy subject. What's sort of happening there? What is it? Any advice that you can give to people to sort of try and give us an insight into sort of understanding what people are going through from their perspective?
Well, I know a lot of the asylum seekers we deal with at Manston in Kent. They've had really hazardous journeys to get to the UK, like really hazardous. And they all, talking to them, which I have done, most of them just want to better themselves. They want to work. They don't want to be a drain on the state. They want to better themselves. And you put that together with the fact that we have huge numbers of vacancies in this country for people that we can't fill. Since we came out, since Brexit, and since the ending of free movement from Europe, we can't fill these vacancies. And we've got lots of people coming to us, some of whom come illegally, claiming asylum, and they want to work. Then, you put the two together, and surely there is some kind of solution to be had there. 1 million vacancies and all these people coming into the country seeking work and seeking to better themselves. That's not to say they're all like that. Of course, you get the exceptions that prove the rule. And, again, the Daily Mail will be full of horror stories about it, as usual. But, they've been through some terrible journeys to get here. They've gone through awful situations, and a lot of them have come from war-torn countries where they really don't feel safe and they want to look after their families. So you've got to be positive about them and treat them decently. They really have.
And how?
I was about to say, it was Winston Churchill, that said you can, one way you can test the well-being of a country is to look inside its prisons. Almost like those weren't the exact words, but that's basically what he said. So the prisons really are a kind of thermometer of how the country is. So if your prisons are good and your prisons feel good and you treat people decently, it's likely the country is doing all right. And we all know countries around the world where the prisons are probably horrific, probably because, as it is, we lock up more of our own population than any other country in Europe. And crime isn't any less in this country than it is in any other country in Europe, is it? So there's something that isn't working, really. So we need to take a big look at all that, I think.
And then in terms of getting people to understand a bit more about these people's stories, how important do you think it is that media is using the right way to sort of let these people understand, or get people to understand what's going on? Because obviously Daily Mail or other tabloids, where a lot of news, for me, it seems like news, just a lot of negativity is just put onto the world, and that sort of put me off the news, because I remember watching it with my parents most nights and basically just going, why am I watching this stuff? Me watching this is making me feel worse about myself and me feel worse about the world. But it's not giving me an understanding as to what these people are dealing with. I understand that people are going through war, but why are they going through it? Why are people experiencing this? Why are people going to seek asylum? Obviously now I'm a bit more educated and understand why. But how important is it for us to sort of understand these people's stories and actually go and listen to what they have to say?
I think it's really important, and it's really important that the media tell positive stories as well, because as you say, they don't always. And there are positive stories, of course there are. I remember doing a television interview with one of the news channels when I was at Wetherby, with a bunch of kids working with a local professional football team, being coached in football, and how it given them education really in working as a team that some of them had never actually had the opportunity to do before, self-discipline, all that kind of stuff. So really good stuff. And I did the interview and I was very positive about it, and they put it out on the telly, and it was Yeah, it was really positive. But they then had a little snatch at the end of that piece. I think it was a woman from the Prison Reform Trust or something who just put a negative on the whole thing by saying things like, well, that's all very well, but, and it
Yeah,
put a bit negative on it. And that's the sort of thing, I suppose, for balance, they put that in, but, you know, it doesn't do any good sometimes. The other thing I think we need to be is open about what we do. So invite cameras in to see what we do in all kind of places to show the difficulties the staff face and how the staff are really talented at getting over those difficulties quite often. So I think the more open we are, the better. Because if prisons used to be quite closed institutions, and of course, a closed institution means that people who outside will just make up stories in their head about what goes on inside. Quite often negative stories, quite often stories that aren't true. So if you show them what goes on inside, they don't need to do that anymore. It's similar to, I've known prison governors who never go out of their office, so the staff don't really know them. They never walk around the jail. They do stuff. They're too busy on the computer in the office. If the staff don't know you, they'll make up stuff about you. Of course they will, because they don't know you, so they'll just make stuff up. And then they'll make bad stuff up, and then they'll end up not liking you because they never see you. And that's where you never get to the stage where I talked about the definition of leadership. You'll never get the willing support from staff if you're like that, because they'll just think, well, I never see him, don't know what he does, don't know what he looks like, don't know what he sounds like. Whereas if you walk around amongst them and talk to them and chat to them and ask them about their lives, how's your wife, how's your kids, all this sort of stuff, they'll think, well, he's a nice bloke, isn't he? And then you talk further, that's when you start to change the culture. So again, it's about not being hidden, isn't it? It's the same thing. It's not being hidden. And I think sometimes prisons and other institutions like centres for asylum seekers suffer from not being sometimes open enough and not having enough in the way of good news stories.
and I think that's a highly important thing. And I'm trying, like my brain was going straight again, sort of to my experience with the schools and how I currently have a gentleman joined us this year and was speaking about one of the schools that he was working at last year and how like their director of sport was just basically just a dick. And just wasn't around and didn't help anyone. And basically, like he got told this thing of, oh, you're just a sports coach, like you're nothing else. And like that's what he got told. And he just went, all right, then I'm going to stop everything else that I'm doing. And you're going to see how everything falls apart. And he did that, and everything fell apart just straight away.
Yeah.
And it was just quite funny, like hearing his stories relating to that. And so like the
Yeah.
openness of like being visible is almost just as important as actually doing that office work.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think I've been fortunate enough to see that in sort of doing coaching and sort of being in the public eye in terms of being with kids. And I think it's quite easy to be around kids and so being that person to go, okay, cool, let's have a chat, let's go talk, let's go do this. And spending time trying to, again, I would say, connect with people and understand people and just remember that people are people. And I think
absolutely. Yeah, and you can't do in that any position of leadership. You can't do everything yourself. You have to get people to do stuff for you, don't you? It's the same in coaching as well. You've got to get. There's that phrase in football, isn't there, where they say the manager's lost the dressing room, and they mean that the players of any sort of buy-in with the management is gone, and that's nothing will work then, will it? So.
Yeah, it's great that you sort of brought that up and how true that really is. And you hear about like managers getting sacked or so people getting kicked out of their jobs. Like, why does that happen? Or people get kicked out of office. It's all the same things. Like I say, like prison like runs with consent, so does football teams. And I think if people can sort of realize that, they can change the perspective that way. That no matter where we are, we're all running on mutual consent. I mean, no one's in charge of one another, and unless they are extreme. Well, there are extreme examples where it's not the case, but in sort of like a country like the UK, it's different titles, sort of branded differently, but still the same principles apply to these things. And when people think about like, well, I'm just using as like with Manchester United at the minute, like with their manager and the media supposedly under pressure, supposedly lost half the dressing room. How long is he going to last? that would be the same thing when it comes to like I said, the prison governance. Like, they're
It's exactly the same. Exactly the same. Yeah, exactly the same. And it's oddly, I suspect it's the same in most organizations, in most sports teams. It's quite a long job and quite difficult sometimes to make a bad prison good, but it's very easy to make a good prison bad.
yeah,
Very easy and very quick. So it's probably the same with a sports team. It's very, it's not easy to make a bad team good, but it's very easy to make a good team bad, isn't it? Yeah. So I think we need to remember that, don't we? In life.
yeah. I very much I kept coming with something on the weekend as well. Is like, yeah, it takes you 10 times longer to build something back up than it is to tear it down.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and like that's really stuck with me. That these small snippets in life, we come across videos or clips, and it's like, oh, okay, it actually makes sense. And then now like, chatting to people and sort of sharing
Mm,
these stories where you can apply them to greater life. Where like I said, you can make a good prison bad in no time, but to make it good is going to take a lot of work to do. Which
yeah,
is just amazing.
absolutely. Yeah.
And is it one story or one lesson? What's your big life lesson that you've learned in your time?
I mean, the big thing for me is the one about leadership, I think, um, which goes together with the fact that um, it's all about people. Everything is all about people, to be honest, I suppose, isn't it? But going on from that, I think I've always remembered the what that old POA man said to me at Manchester all those years ago. Every day you're working life, somebody's going to get one over on you. If you can't handle that, you're in the wrong job. And he's absolutely right. And you have to learn to handle that. You have to learn to handle that. I think, yeah, I think that's about it for me. It's all about people and it's all about enjoying what you do. And if
Find
that
something
means,
that's worth worrying about.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was looking for something that was worth worrying about, and I was lucky I found it. And I used to say to staff, when the prison going through difficult times, there's been some assaults on staff or whatever, I'd say to them, look, I bet you lot know lots of people who are in jobs outside the prison service who probably earn more than you do, but the jobs are probably really dull and boring, like really dull. Because there are lots of really dull jobs out there, like really boring jobs that don't actually matter. I said, there's one thing for your job, working in prison, it really matters, and it's never dull.
Yeah.
And that's worth a lot. It's worth a huge amount of money. That it really is in salary terms, because I know lots of people who earn a lot more than I do, but they're in really boring jobs, like really dull, doing stuff I don't really understand to do with accountancy or something. Like really dull stuff. And I would hate to be in that situation. So we've a lot to be thankful for if we're in people-facing jobs. A lot to be thankful for. Leaving difficulties aside, but we do.
There's a lot more value in spending time with people than there is
Yeah,
in money in a way. And
yeah. We're designed to interact with people, aren't we?
yeah, oh,
Um,
100%. And I think that's been quite an interesting focus for me the last while with with my parents and sort of their business.
yeah, you've talked about a bit about them. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of like seeing how like important relations are for all of us and for them to sort of like I said, like they haven't really gotten out much since COVID, but when they
Mm,
do get out, they are really social people. They do have a good time. They do enjoy it. And
mm,
for me now, it's sort of seeing like, okay, cool. I know there are a lot of jobs and even in teaching and education that are earning a lot more than I am, and that's fine. But for me, like my thought is they don't actually get to interact with the kids the way I do, or they
mm,
don't get to interact with the people that
mm.
I do in the way that I can. And that's
Uh,
allowed me to make the difference that I wanted to make. And I've learned so much more from that. And that's sort of how everyone says, like the materialistic life doesn't last. Like
mm,
you can take my clothes, you can take all of that, but what I am as an individual, that's in my core, is a lot more valuable than what money has to offer. And
mm.
those lessons when sort of like us like sharing stories now, it
I've
provides
I
a lot
agree
of
with
that.
I've actually heard head teachers say that to me, that they wish that they weren't head teachers anymore because it was all they missed the teaching, they missed the day to day. And all of a sudden they're in a job where there's very little time to do any teaching. And a lot of them have said to me, we miss that because I joined to teach. I didn't join to be a head administrator. I joined to teach.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. I can understand that well, really can. Just a little funny story to finish with, then, as long as I can swear, just very briefly.
Go on then. Go on.
When I worked at Risley, a lot of the staff were from either Warrington or Wigan or Lee, very close to Risley. My office, I was deputy governor there. My office was right next to the custody admin office, so there were lots of women working in there, in the administration bit. And they all were from the local areas, and they thought I was dead posh because I spoke quite nicely. And so they used to say to me, they heard me swear once, and thereafter they used to say to me, "Go on, Andrew, say fuck." So every day when I left, because when they said it came out like fuck, like this, yeah. But they thought I said it very nicely. So every day when I was about to leave, if they were still in the office, I'd say to them, "I'm going to fuck off now." And they would all clap like this. Which I remember a visitor was in once, a professional person visiting the prison, and he heard that. He was horrified. But that was one way of getting. They would have done anything for me, that lot, because they liked it when I said that, And so the use of humour, that's people again, isn't it? It's just people again. I'm not posh, really. I just speak nicely.
Amazing. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you coming on, and this is these conversations keep getting better and better, and it's lovely to sort of see what life is like through someone that's worked in the custodian services and sort of lived a life that has ended up being for people, and it is still for people, and how important being around people and doing things for people is, and that we all. So that's what we designed for, and I think we spent a lot of time neglecting that. But it's been fantastic to sort of hear what life is like. Good. Well, it's been really enjoyable doing it. Real pleasure to do it for you, Dylan. Real pleasure.